I'm pleased to introduce our panel, Boardroom Diversity, Policy, and Perspectives. Our exceptional panelists are California State Treasurer Fiona Ma, Alan Lowe, CEO of Lumentum, and David Chun, founder and CEO of Equilar. Our panel is moderated by Ibi Krukrubo, managing partner at EY.
Awesome. It's great to be with this group. Very much acknowledge here in the Valley that board diversity is a challenge, but we also acknowledge that, as it's been said, in the Valley, we do hard things, we run to problems. So this conversation today really is with a group of esteemed leaders to talk about some of the practical advice and perspectives they have on moving the needle around board diversity. So with that, let's get into it. Alan, just to kick this off, I know when you joined Lumentum several years ago in 2015, at that point in time, the board had something like less than 20% women on the board. And today you're basically gender balanced. So curious if you could just share with the group your story of how that evolved and so some takeaways for the group.
Sure. Well, first of all, Ibi, thank you for having me on the panel. It's a great privilege to be here. I think maybe what makes most sense is to talk about my journey of learning around board diversity. And it started back in 1999. I became a CEO for the first time. I inherited a board of, as you can imagine, in 1999, white men. And that was kind of the way it was at the time. And it's a very different time now. I joined JDS Uniphase, which was the parent company of what Lumentum spun out of in 2015. I joined them in 2007, another all male board, of which we added one board member. I was not on the board at the time, but I sat through plenty of the board meetings. We added a woman board member at the time in 2008, which was a great start. But I think as Dr. Lowery talked about this morning, you have to actually listen to them. And I think the experience that I saw in the boardroom where you had one woman, and she had great ideas, but she was not listened to and talked over, and that was just not a successful board. When we spun out in 2015, I took that woman with me and two other board members from JDSU and filled out the board later. And in 2017, we had a requirement for a consumer electronics expert. We didn't have that on the board. And we went out to a search firm. We mandated that we only wanted to see women. And I think that's really important because they wanted to bring women and men and we could choose. But when we mandated that it had to be a woman, we got, I think, the right level of attention on getting what we wanted. And we hired a fantastic board member in Julie Johnson in 2017. And then unfortunately in 2019, our board chair passed away. And Penny Hersher, who was that woman that joined the board of JDSU in 2008, became our board chair, which was fantastic. She's been a great board chair since then. And then we added just another board member to really fill out the balance in the board with Janet Wong, who has just been a fantastic board member. So I guess my advice is balance is great. Being heard is great, listening to is great, and diversification at the board level has made me a better CEO and the company a better company.
That's great to hear, Alan. And part of what I just heard from you too was the focus and mandating as you filled out for your roles, starting with skills, but also then saying we want to make sure this is a slate of women because of what you saw as a gap. So that's really great. And perhaps it's a good segue to Treasurer Ma here, who I'm pleased to have with us. And I thought perhaps get your perspective on California has had an evolution of rules in this space. I'd love to get your perspective on that and what you're hearing from businesses.
Yeah, so, I think like Alan talked about, right? The status quo remains the status quo unless something happens to shake it up. And here in California, with the passage of SB 826 in 2018, it was a Hannah Jackson bill signed by Governor Jerry Brown, mandated a certain number of women on corporate boards that are headquartered here in California. So back in 2018, the number of companies, public companies that had no women on their corporate boards was 180 out of 650. Since the passage of SB 826, now there's only 15 companies out of 650 that don't have a woman on corporate boards. Similarly, Assemblymember Holden passed AB 979 requiring minorities, certain amount of minority folks to be on corporate boards, and Governor Gavin Newsom signed that bill. And so we should be seeing more changes. But like Alan says, having one token woman on a board is really not enough. It has to be deliberate. And sometimes the states have to mandate certain behaviors. And so that's what California has done. And we've heard anecdotally that the number of boards with men wouldn't replace a man, but they would just add another board seat to have a woman. And even the woman that was appointed or asked to join the board was not necessarily the most qualified woman, but it was a woman that people knew, they were comfortable with, they were recommended by either the executive or the board, and then the headhunters would come in and interview the recommendations from the board, not really a real search for the most qualified person. And so that's something that I think it has to evolve, because there's a lot of women. I have about 400 resumes in my database. I've done webinars soliciting input and webinars about how to get on these elusive corporate boards. And there's many qualified women that just don't know how to break in.
Well, totally appreciate you sharing that. And no, just hearing you say you've got 400 women that are in your pocketbook, so to speak, or like playbook that people would want to know. I'm sure there are a lot of people that would like to know all those people. And it actually takes me to thinking about this question about the pipeline. Is it a big enough pipeline, and where do we find them? And David, I thought, given the work that you do, getting your perspective on, is the pipeline too small? What are you seeing work?
Yeah, no, I mean, without any hesitation, there are more than enough candidates to fill the open board seats. And just building on Treasurer Ma's talking about SB 826 and whatnot, the recent AB 979. So before SB 826 was passed, we actually ranked the states and the gender diversity, which states were doing better. California was 35th. When at the time the bill was passed. We're now up to 15th just on the gender diversity. And then when SB 826 is fully implemented, California should be, assuming there's no major changes with other states, we should be number 2. And the only reason we're not number 1 is because the state of New Mexico has one public company, the utility, which is at 40%. So that's the only reason we wouldn't be number 1. But getting back to your point, Ibi, we at Equilar, so for those who aren't familiar with us, we track data around corporate leadership. And so many of us know about, in addition to SB 826 and AB 979, the NASDAQ proposed listing requirements. And so we're NASDAQ's preferred partner around helping companies source diverse talent. And us being Silicon Valley, we can certainly lead the nation by by offering, which we have built, a digital solution to help companies be able to source that talent. And so we've actually worked very closely with Alan's latest new board member, Janet Wong. So Janet was most recently headed up a group called Ascend Pinnacle, which is the premier organization for Asian directors. And so in addition to Ascend Pinnacle, we're working with the Executive Leadership Council, ELC. We're working with Sigma Pi Phi, the Boulay, with Tracy Porter and Cole Peterson of that organization. And then the Latino Corporate Directors Association, Esther Aguilera's group, and about 50 other groups to make it very easy, literally in a matter of seconds, to help people to not only identify candidates, but also more importantly, who in their network might know that candidate. Because so much around board dynamics is having that comfort level of, okay, who knows this person? Because at the end of the day, right, when you're bringing on a board member, in essence, you're almost getting, it's like 10 people getting married for the next 10 years. And so you want to have a comfort level from a dynamics that, culturally, that there's a good fit. And so we're excited how many companies are using our solution and our partnership with NASDAQ and CalPERS and CalSTRS and others in this helping address the supply issue.
And David, perhaps to follow up on that, that's great to hear how you're leveraging technology to open up the aperture, if you will. when you're seeing companies do well in this space, what are they doing? Maybe one or two things that you're saying work well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what Alan talked and Treasurer Mod said a couple earlier in the conversation. They're intentional about it. You know, they are saying like, we are going to, so there's the Rooney Rule, right? Which for those who aren't familiar with it, right, coming from the NFL, being very intentional of making sure that there are candidates in the pipeline, but also making it a priority that we will hire a person of color or a woman for this particular role. So in addition to SB 826 and AB 979, the other, frankly, the more important force out in the marketplace it's the institutional investor community, right? BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, you know, everybody's largest shareholders. Everybody's got a diversity initiative this year because of what we touched on earlier, is that they see, you know, the data shows, as mentioned in earlier sessions, that diversity, more diverse companies outperform the less diverse organizations.
Really helpful. And you mentioned being intentional. You also mentioned earlier the partnership you have with NASDAQ, and maybe this takes me back to Treasurer Ma. I saw you wrote the letter in support of the NASDAQ's proposal, in particular around disclosure. So maybe give your perspective on the benefit of transparency and disclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. The more transparent we are, the better data we can compile to figure out whether something is working. But I did want to go back to what David said and what you said about a pipeline, and it has to be intentional. And I'll give you an example. Jerry Brown, when he was governor, he committed to having 50% of his appointees women. And I was president and a board member of California Women Lead. And our job was to go around and actually recruit and train women to apply for these gubernatorial boards. And for women, they always say, well, I don't know if I'm qualified, or I've never donated to that candidate. I'm not active in the party. I'm a Republican. Like, why should I, you know, so all these questions. And 8 years, Governor Brown maintained 50% of his appointees as women, thanks in large part to Mona Pascal, who is now with Facebook, but she was his appointment secretary, and she made sure that he kept that 50%. Governor Newsom has also committed to having 50% of women in the pipeline. So when you talk about, is there enough? You can start with the state of California. There are 50% of the thousands of boards. I think he probably has, I don't know, like 3,500 boards that are 50% women. So there's a lot of women to choose from.
Totally appreciate you sharing that. It actually reminds me of a conversation I was in earlier this week where a VC who is not a diverse male said, it's really not a pipeline problem, it's a matching problem. So a lot of what you just said resonates with me. Alan, maybe let me go back to you on this idea of transparency and disclosure and get your reactions as a CEO of one of our bigger companies here in the Valley.
Well, I think it's a good start. I mean, I think being transparent will, forcing transparency will force the companies that haven't taken the action and haven't been deliberate to take action. And I agree 100%. The pipeline is not the problem. It's the being deliberate that's the problem. And I just one thing that I disagreed with David, we don't go after a cultural fit, go after a cultural add. And there is a
good point
nuance there about getting diverse thought and diverse background. Doesn't necessarily have to be a cultural fit. In fact, it's better if it's not.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think this idea of what does this person add to the mix is it's a nuanced question, but it makes such a difference. David, maybe just to close the loop on this transparency point, maybe your perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, so as you mentioned about the letters, the comment letters to the SEC, what was very exciting, having followed a number of them, it's not only, you know, government officials like Treasurer Ma, but a number of folks from the institutional investor community, a number of, you know, Alan's largest shareholders, you know, the Capital Group, Wellington, the list goes on. The investor community, they want this information. They want to be able to see it because it's showing, it's demonstrating to investors that, you know, hey, if boards are taking this seriously, taking governance seriously, that gives them a good indication that they're running the organization well. And so and then you've had a number of actually the board of Bright House Financial. They wrote a letter to support the initiative. So it was pretty amazing. The various groups who were very open about the transparency. Like we've often heard the term sunshine is often the best disinfectant. So let's get the data out there.
Totally makes sense. And to your point, the broad base of support for more transparency has been good to see. So a number of people on this panel are people who sit on boards and want to get the perspective of everything you've been sharing, which is great. But there are also probably some people who are thinking, I'm qualified, I'm part of this pipeline, I would love to be on a board. And so Alan, maybe give some perspectives on if I were somebody who is sitting here thinking, I want to be on a board, how do I go about positioning myself for that first board seat?
Yeah, I mean, I think be vocal about it and start networking. I think if you're a CEO, join a CEO network, a roundtable group, and put out the word that you're interested. If you're not a CEO, talk to your CEO about what he thinks about, or he or she, I should say, gosh, about joining a board. What skill sets are necessary? I think get educated on what does it mean to be a board member, and what are the committees that are part of the board, and how might you be a good fit or add to a company. And then I think lastly, find a mentor that can help you navigate through the process, because I think you'd be surprised. People will want to help you and go out and just make a statement. Don't be afraid if you're qualified or not qualified. I think to Treasurer Ma's comment, I mean, people are very qualified, and I think getting that education, getting that mentorship will really help go a long way.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, I had 2 women call me in the last 2 weeks. Great resumes. I mean, super qualified, have done everything. And they're like, well, we want to sit on the corporate board. They want, one is biotech and one is like technology. And I said, well, that's great. I go, tell me which companies, right? I can make the introduction, but I'm not going to send out, everybody's resume to, 400 companies, right? So they need to be a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful about which companies they want to sit on.
Totally makes sense. And David, maybe one of the things this makes me think about is also you're a place where people go to say, where can I find talent? So if I'm an individual thinking about how do I get connected to Equilar, talk about that.
Yeah. So we've actually, as I mentioned, touched on earlier, we have built out as part of our data set, the Diverse Director Data Source, which is the CalPERS and CalSTRS initiative around board diversity, so people can go in and add their profiles. So we've had thousands of individuals in addition to the data that we track of people who've added profiles to the data set. But I just want to build on Alan's point and Treasurer Ma's point. You have to be, just as much as boards need to be intentional in terms of finding diverse candidates. Well, people who would like to join a board, you need to be intentional and be able to and be thoughtful about this, as opposed to, okay, I just want to join a board. I mean, keep in mind, right? It is a pretty competitive process. So it's not something like all of a sudden, unless you're Melody Hobson or somebody of that ilk, it's going to be, there's frankly, in often situations, a longer journey of getting there. And so it's going out there, building your board network, being very intentional about it, putting yourself out in play, letting people know. But, and it's not all of a sudden like, there's the Russell 3,000 companies. On average, one board seat opens up per year per company. So there's only going to be 3,000 people who would be selected to be joining a board. And then keep in mind, a lot of those board seats are going to people who are already on a board. So if you're not on a board today, the number of actual seats, it's a pretty tough process. So I want to be able to set expectations. So in that regard, I would, make sure, potentially join a nonprofit board, start to build that board network. And there's a journey of getting there onto that public board.
Super. Treasurer Ma.
Can I just ask David, and that's what we've heard is like, there's women that sit on a number of different corporate boards, yet there's a lot of women who don't sit on any corporate boards. Like, is there a way to equalize things so that one woman doesn't sit on 5 corporate boards?
Yeah, it's a catch-22, right? We want to join a board, but they want somebody who has experience. So who's going to give experience? So as Alan pointed out, is really finding the mentors, people who are willing to, quote unquote, take that chance, on somebody who hasn't been on board. But the good news here is that a lot of new people, not a number of that bar of joining a board and not having prior board experience has definitely come down. The bars, it's quote unquote easier. The numbers are definitely getting better, but that is absolutely a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But I think as long as you can find good mentors along the way, you definitely have somebody who can recommend you. Like, hey, I know so and so that that he or she has never been on a board yet, before, but feel very confident that the person would be a great addition.
Thanks for that. And Treasurer Ma, I appreciate the question. It's interesting. We've started to talk about at the leadership group how we start to change the narrative from, yes, we agree, board diversity is good, but the pipeline is small, to yes, and let me introduce you. So this is the start of this conversation and journey. So to wrap this up, going around, lightning around here, as we think about board diversity in 2021, one word that comes to mind, and perhaps to start with you, Treasurer Ma.
I would say insufficient.
Fair enough. Alan?
Purposeful.
Purposeful. David?
Optimistic.
Optimistic. Interestingly, all of those I think are relevant, but we look forward with optimism relative to how we can help make a difference. And it's been a great pleasure to share the virtual stage with you all. And thank you on behalf of the leadership group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This clip brought to you by the following sponsors. Thanks for watching. For more information and clips, go to svlg.org.